I'm Beth Solon. I'm the director of Multisolving Institute. Welcome to our celebratory release webinar about Flower, the first app that we know of for multisolving. We're really excited to have reached this milestone. Many of you have had a role in getting us here, so we'll have a time to acknowledge and celebrate a lot of that. We're going to give it 1 or 2 minutes for people who are arriving. We still see a few people joining, but while we're waiting, feel free, please, to introduce yourself in the chat. It would be great to include where you're coming from, where you live and work. If you've used Flower in one of its earlier forms, that would be, I think people would be interested to know about that. I know I will. And as a reminder, we're going to be recording the webinar for people who want to be here but couldn't make the time work. If you're just joining, my name is Beth Solon. I'm the director of Multisolving Institute. Joining me today and sharing some of the facilitation with me is Kelsey Bowens. Kelsey, do you want to say hello? And then we have many folks on the team that brought us Flower here, so we'll acknowledge them at different points through the webinar. I'm going to get us started, and I'm going to start actually with a quote from more than 40 years ago from my mentor, Danella Meadows, who wrote, and Kelsey can share the link. It's quite an interesting piece to look back at this article from 1982. Danella said, "The world is a complex, interconnected, finite, ecological, social, psychological, economic system. A complex, interconnected, finite, ecological, social, psychological, economic system." So take that in. It's whole, it's interconnected. That's what she's trying to express. We treat it, she said, as if it were not, as if it were divisible, separable, simple, and infinite. Our persistent, intractable global problems arise directly from this mismatch. And I would add, from my own observations, that our persistent, intractable local problems and organizational problems arise from the same mismatch. The world is one way, it's complex, it's interdependent, it's interconnected, it's dynamic, and we treat it as though it could be divided into budget categories or university divisions or state bodies. And that's, as far as I can say, you may have your own opinions, that's not going very well for humans here on planet Earth. We're trying to live in a certain reality with tools and cultures and ways of operating that in many cases don't fit it very well. So that's really the purpose of Multisolving Institute, is to try to do our part to make it easier for people to work with instead of against this complex, interconnected, ecological, social, psychological, economic system. We do that by the word that we use for this way of working with interconnection instead of against it is multisolving, which we define as using one investment of time or effort to solve for several goals at once in a way that also improves equity and in a way that strengthens what we call a web of relationships worldview. And in those last 2 lines, improves equity and strengthens this worldview. There's many webinars of content. Kelsey can share one link to a recorded webinar from a few months ago we call the Multisolving Way, that digs more into why do we stress equity, why do we stress a web of relationships worldview, if you're curious to pursue that a little bit more. One thing that we've learned now, our team has been working on multisolving for close to 10 years, is that there are many people in the world who are working with and answering in some ways that charge from Danella Meadows in 1982 to try to work with the world as it is instead of in this siloed, separated way. Many of you are on this call, right? People who devoted their lives to working in a way that acknowledges interconnection and mutuality and relationship. But many of you, we learn because we've interviewed lots of multi-solvers, we've worked alongside them, feel pretty unsupported by the tools the world gives us, either in our education or, at the App Store. Those tools seem designed more for that world that doesn't actually exist, the one of silos and divisions. So flower is one of our contributions to try to even that up a little bit, to offer a tool maybe for meeting the world as it is a bit more. Flower stands for the framework. Here it is up here, the framework for long-term whole system equity-based reflection. And what we want to do today is through a variety of different exercises, give you a glimpse into how we've designed flower and get you thinking about how you might use it in your own work. To start, we're going to touch on a handful of key needs that we hear of over and over again from multi-solvers. Here's the first one. To multi-solve, you need ways to visualize the interplay of multiple benefits and trade-offs. So I'm going to leave PowerPoint. We're going to do this move a lot today, toggling between PowerPoint, and now we're in Flower, which is in my browser and could be in your browser. So I'm going to go to this view called Create Flowers to talk about this idea of we need ways to visualize multiple benefits and their interplay. In Flower, we have focused on 8 benefits that we think are our best shot at capturing what most of the multi-solvers we know are focusing on. And so we'll go through those to get you oriented. Connection is what we call, some people use words like social cohesion. We think of connection between people, but also connection between people and nature. Jobs and livelihoods is about income and access to opportunity. It's also about anything that saves money so that people have more of their paycheck left for food and medicine and education and recreation. Resilience, the ability to withstand and recover from shocks and disruptions and disasters. The built environment, here is where we place benefits like housing, shelter, mobility, access to energy. Food and water. Climate protection, both reducing greenhouse gases and sequestering greenhouse gases that are in the atmosphere and pulling them down. Biodiversity, and health and well-being. So those are the categories of benefits. And to show you how this works, over here we're going to start with the benefits tab. And this menu has all of those 8 benefits we just went through. So we'll start with jobs and livelihoods. So focus your attention over here to the blue jobs and livelihoods. And I'm just going to move this slider, which is how much, imagine we're talking about a policy or an investment. How much does it benefit jobs and livelihoods for whatever situation we're talking about? So watch what happens as I move the slider up. More benefit, right? Somewhat better, significantly better. The higher I drag the slider, the bigger the petal gets. So that's the first thing about interpreting flower. The bigger the petal, the more benefit whoever created that flower is saying they think will come. But we know that in complex systems, not everything is a benefit. Sometimes there's losses. So if a great idea that's wonderful for biodiversity and for health eliminates jobs, which is something that could happen. Now look what happens as I say jobs are getting worse, a little worse, a lot worse. So that petal's not blue anymore. You see it's a gray, dark gray color. So in flower, we use dark gray to represent losses or burdens. And the bigger the gray petal, the bigger the loss. And because this world is so complex and interconnected, rarely is there one petal at a time. So we might want to see a lot of improvement in food and water and maybe a little bit of improvement in health. Connection in a flower diagram lies at the center. And so this brownish circle gets bigger and bigger and bigger the more that an investment is thought that it's going to strengthen people's connections to one another or to nature. So that's how we are addressing that first need. Here's another need for multi-solvers: ways to build shared vision and shared commitment to one another's struggles and needs. How do we look at that in flower? So for that, we're going to show you there's only really two views where the action is in flower. You just saw the first one here with create flowers. Now we're looking at assess needs. So you'll notice the same 8 co-benefits and these sliders. And the way this view works, the further to the right you pull a slider, you're saying this is a priority need in our neighborhood, in our organization, in our nation, whatever is the focus of your attention. You can have as many priorities as you want, and they can be all of different sizes, like climate is second most important, maybe. Some things may, in a certain situation, be not even kind of moderately important. They're really okay as they are. We don't need a lot of improvement. Now, this is pretty quick and easy, right? I can move sliders all day. And for those of you, because I know there's many facilitators and organizers on this call, you know that a lot of the time what we do is we give people a question to answer, an object to look at. But the question and the object aren't the point, right? It's the conversation. It's people becoming more clear about what they think and why, listening to each other, learning from each other. So you could spend a morning, an hour, a day with a group deciding how to represent these sliders together. Because it's a very different exercise for one person to think of their priorities than it is to get clear about our priorities together. So something happens when the person who's solely focused on climate listens to why someone else wants this job slider to be really high. Someone's speaking about the impact on their family, on their neighborhood, of scarcity of good jobs. So what we hope is that the process, and what we've seen is the process of setting these sliders is a way to build shared vision of what we want to see together, but also what we call solidarity, commitment to goals that might not be a goal that we personally share. I may have a great job, but through this process, I'm committed that everybody in my country, in my neighborhood, have access to the job that they need. So that's what this assess needs view is. In a minute, we'll see there's an interplay between these two layers, between the benefits layer here, where you create flowers, and the needs layer, where you set your goals. There's other things you need to do to multi-solve. You need to identify places where you need to learn more, or where you need to invite additional perspectives. It's very clear to us at Multisolving Institute, we're moving into unknown territory in all of our systems, between the impacts of climate change and biodiversity loss and new pathogens and political destabilization. We know we have a lot of learning ahead of us and responsiveness. So it was important to us that Flower be able to address that. And here's our thinking about that. You notice that these sliders are qualitative, right? Somewhat better, a lot better. This is probably different than lots of tools that you have used, where the climate slider might have units like tons of CO2, and the food unit might have, the food slider might have units like yield per acre of corn. This is a different type of tool, and it's intentionally qualitative to support building and accessing collective intelligence. So in any group of people, in our experience, there's some people who have a lot of maybe expertise from study or science, but maybe lived experience about particular benefits, and they may not know much about others. And so what we encourage in a group is, first of all, to turn to the internal expertise that you have. You want to give a little more power to the expert on community gardens about how big the food petal should be. And maybe the public health person in your group has something to teach you all about the size of the health and well-being petal. But sometimes you're not going to have that expertise within your group. Like a successful flower event might have you leaving with 3 questions that need research. You may find that there isn't research on your question, but maybe there's someone else in your community or your government who does have that information. So another outcome of struggling to set these sliders, because it can be a struggle, It's not always going to be obvious and you're not always going to be sure. Might be, who else do we need to involve in this project? Because they bring information about the job slider, and they can help us have more confidence in where we think we should set it. And finally, there may be cases where not only can you not find the research or the expert, nobody knows, and you're going to therefore have to be learners. But coming up to the edge of that, of realizing where your confidence is weak in setting these sliders, that's going to tell you priorities going forward in your work. What experiments do you need to do? What pilot projects? And what do you need to measure and pay attention to so that 5 years from now, you're way more confident about where to set a particular slider than you were when you started. To multi-solve, we believe you need to be able to, together as groups, explore options and how those options relate to your visions and goals. And you need to do that inexpensively and quickly before you build the project, before you spend millions, do construction, pass the policy. So I hope you're getting the sense of Flower being as simple as we could make it, as quick and easy to use. That's because we don't want to do these experiments in real life, right? It's too expensive and we don't have time. We want to do them by pooling our vision, our imagination, the information that we do have collectively. We've built Flower so that you can make 2 flowers, 3 flowers, or 4 flowers at a time. So 4 different ideas about what you might do in a particular piece of vacant land or with a particular national policy. So here's how it goes. Let's just go back to 2 flowers so you can see a little better. It's the same idea. Now we're working in flower 2. That's because you can see this is bright blue here. So now when I move the jobs slider, we're making a second flower. And we'll just, without thinking too much, give a few benefits. And let's say this one is really excellent for climate protection as well. So in an engagement, if you're a facilitator, an organizer, a teacher, you'd obviously be going much more slowly than I am today. And you'd be iterating again on where should these sliders be and mediating perhaps questions or disagreements. Eventually, you'll have 2 flowers, one for the bike lane and one for the community gardens, or one for the energy rebates and one for the walk to school program, like whatever the things are that are relevant. I want to show you how this comparison now helps you connect back to the goals that you identified. So I'm going to draw your attention to these numbers here, which we call the need score. The need score goes as high as 100, and the higher the score is, the more the flower you created is providing the benefits you said were most important to you back in this view. So we created, say, a community where climate and jobs were the most important priorities. So flowers just doing math for us in the background and helping us see at a glance with this number that climate and jobs, the things we thought were most important, come along more with our second idea than with our first idea. So if we're doing kind of a rapid winnowing of ideas, this is a way to start to prioritize things. But of course, no flower is ever the last word either. Maybe we really loved this first idea, and this gives us a push like, gosh, there has to be a way with our first flower that has to be energy efficient too. And if we just change the design, maybe we can boost our score on this one a little bit. Sometimes it's helpful to move from the numbers to a graph. I'll make that a little bigger for you and show that this needs score can be looked at graphically. And if you have 4 flowers going, we won't build all 4, but you can see how there would be a place to show the need score of all 4 flowers, and a group could kind of rapidly sort through possibilities that way. So you get rid of that, make that a little smaller, and let's go back to just 1 flower. What other needs do multi-solvers have? They or we need to take effective action on equity and justice. And it's been really important for us to grapple with how could flower be useful to people who are doing that important work. So I'm going to show you how we think about that in flower. So now we're going to move from this. We've been doing everything with this tab about benefits. We're going to just move here. You can tell where you are by it being dark, right? So now we're on the equity tab. It looks pretty much the same, right? The same 8 benefits, same slider from very much better to very much worse. But now we're not talking about the size of the benefit. We're talking about is this benefit, so in this case, we're on jobs. Is this policy producing jobs that are going to address a historic inequity? Are they going to make our city, our nation more equitable? If we think so, it's going to be a big improvement in equity when it comes to jobs because we've built in so much job training or so much preference in our RFP for women-owned businesses, whatever that is. We're going to move the slider up. Do you see as I go up, the jobs pedal, this one here is getting darker. I'll go back. This is where we started. More equitable, more and more and more equitable. But we also know, and we run into our work, in our work, we run into places where intentionally or unintentionally, our policies make things less equitable. And we want Flower to be able to show that too. So equity when it comes to jobs is getting worse. See what happens to the pedal. It's getting fainter and fainter. So equity is sometimes falls differently for different benefits. This could be very inequitable when it comes to jobs, but when it comes to health, it's very equitable. So that's why these sliders move independently. So part of an engagement with Flower is to think, given the policies we have, how are the burdens and benefits being shared of each of these petals? And of course, again, we're not trying to produce the perfect diagram. What we're trying to do is improve our thinking. Like, shoot, no one wanted the jobs to be so unfair. Like, we must not be done in our policy thinking. There must be something else we can do that is an improvement, because this is an important value of ours. So that's how Flower is opening up conversations about equity for people. To multi-solve, you also need strategies to expand partnerships. We see this in so many multi-solving projects that they often start with a few partners, but the successful ones are able to bring in more and more partners. And so we've built one more tab for you to help you look at that. We call this support. And in support, we're thinking about funding. We're also thinking about volunteers and resources and materials. So we'll stick with the jobs pedal. And watch as I say there's more and more support for coming from the jobs sector. So you might do this if a project was, let's say the Department of Economic Development was the main funder of this project. And let's say the Department of Public Health, maybe they kicked in a little bit of support and helped get things going. So you see fewer arrows here around health, a lot around jobs. So what we want people to do at a glance is look for mismatches. Like, wow, okay, support coming from this part of the diagram, no support down here. What that means are people who care about the outcomes you're getting, who so far aren't putting investment into your work. That's a natural partner. Who is it that you need to know, network with, make the case to expand your work? So that's how we're trying to help people think about partnership. The last important thing we think multi-solvers need to do is to understand and help groups build their mental models about how impacts play out over time. So if we go back again, I'm gonna get rid of these just to make this a little bit cleaner for you all to focus on what's changing. We'll just remove those arrows. So think back to what Donella Meadows said about that complex interconnected system. We know that when things change in complex systems like that, they don't all change at the same time. Yet we often are neglecting the time dimension in our thinking, and that causes a lot of problems. If your project and you're planting trees, but they're going to take 10 years to produce shade and therefore resilience, and yet the mayor is going to campaign on how much the temperature of the city improved, like you've got some problems with that strategy. Or if you need your funder to stick around for 10 years to help you nurture those trees until they're fully grown. So we want people to be able to think about not only what benefits happen, but with what time course. And that's this section of the controls down here called animate. You're in the benefits menu again. You pick whatever benefit you're focused on. Let's take health for a change. And you ask 2 questions of yourself or the group. When will we start to see health benefits? And let's say maybe we think that's in year 5 of our project. And how long will it take those benefits to reach their full amount? And we think maybe that's in year 15. I won't take the time, but we could set this for all of the petals. And in a typical flower exercise, you take that time. I'm going to push this button here that says animate. You'll watch 2 things. The counter, this is saying what year of the, between the start year and 20 years out, what year you're looking at. And then, so keep one eye on the time, the year, and keep one eye on the health and well-being petal. And let's see what happens. Okay, we're up to year 5. We're starting to get improvement, and it's going to grow until year 20 when we said it was complete. In case you missed it, I'll just do it one more time. At the end of the webinar, we'll give you the link where you can access Flower, and you'll play with this and get a feeling for it. But for now, we just want you to know we've tried to give you the capability to improve your own thinking and the thinking of the groups you work with when it comes to time and timing. So those are the main needs that we wanted to address. I am not having any kind of eye on the chat, so I'm going to pause and ask Kelsey, is there any big questions or stuck points coming up, or should I keep going?
I think you can keep going for now, but if you guys have any questions for us, feel free to drop those in the chat.
Awesome. All right, well, we know that, or we imagine that this is a lot to take in. Some of you have used a very different paper and pencil version of Flower. There's a lot of new capabilities we think are powerful, but also a lot to get oriented to. We thought one way to give, to sort of continue that orientation we've just started is to work through an example. And for the example, I was inspired by this article in Grist from earlier this year. I don't know if any of you live in Denver or in other cities where you can get a voucher toward an e-bike. But Kelsey will put the link to this article in the chat if you're curious. But what we want you to try to do is actually make your own really quick flower. And we're going to have to do this quickly. So if you have a piece of paper handy, make it pretty big and write these 8 labels in this order around the circle, if you would. And leave yourself enough room because in the middle, you're going to draw some petals. What we're going to do is I'm going to tell you the highlights of that example from Denver. And you're going to see what petals you think would be produced. And then I'm going to make what I think it fits best in Flower, and we'll compare. Okay, so I'll give you just a minute, grab your paper. You can just write jobs, resilience, like abbreviate, do it quick. This is just a quick exercise. I'm going to move from this slide, but you'll be able to see the labels again when we go back to Flower. So don't worry if you don't get them all. So this is the program. They gave rebates of up to $1,400 toward an e-bike. And the city also gave grants to nonprofits to create e-bike infrastructure, like protected bike lanes, places to safely park your bike, lock it, programs to build e-bike libraries. So they're trying to both increase the number of bikes and improve the infrastructure for it. And they've had amazing success over a few years. There's been 8,000 bikes that people have had rebates for. When the city announces a new round of rebates, they're totally claimed in under 8 minutes. That's how popular this program is. They estimate that so far, the city has avoided 170,000 miles of trips by car per week. They say this is one of the most effective climate strategies the city and county of Denver has deployed to date. We know with less trips in the car, there's reduced CO2 emissions and better air quality. They also have done surveys of the people using these bikes, and they mentioned things like avoiding traffic and congestion, getting to work more quickly, work or school, being able to take more direct routes, say by cutting through a park, saving dollars on gasoline and upkeep of a car. They're able to experience their neighborhoods at a slower pace and have increased physical activity. Because the e-bike is basically an assist going uphill, but a lot of time you're moving under your own power. So those are the benefits that stood out for me from that article. So to do the exercise, go back to here. Hopefully you have your pedals labeled. I'll give you another glimpse at this. And now let's just take 2 or 3 minutes. And it's going to be quick. What pedals are you seeing? And make your best guess. And this is your first taste of setting those sliders, right? You're not going to be completely sure. Just take your best guess. What pedals are middle? What pedals are really big? What pedals might be smaller? And ask if there's any pedals that might actually be a loss or a burden. All right, so I'm going to give you a minute or two to try your diagram, and then I'm going to make my own in flower for you to all see. While you're working, I'm going to clean out the flowers that we've already created today and start fresh. Okay, so when I read that article, the benefit that jumped out at me first, and that quote about this is the best transportation climate initiative we've seen, had me making the climate protection pedal pretty big. I heard about people having more access to physical activity. That made me think about health and well-being, because we know how much chronic illness is abated by more physical activity. I also heard less emissions from cars moving through the street, which means to me more air quality and a reduction in those illnesses like cardiovascular disease and premature birth that are really impacted by air pollution. I'm going to go to the jobs pedal, and that's because I heard people saving money on gasoline and car upkeep, meaning they have more of their paycheck for other priorities. And that didn't sound as huge to me, so I'm going to make kind of a smaller pedal there. I heard about people moving through the city at a slower pace. And what I know, and this was not so much in the article as in other research on this topic, but lots of studies show that when people move on foot or on bike, they stop, they have conversations, they notice gardens, they go into cafes. It builds a sense of social connection, whereas cars often erode that. And then we heard about people being stuck in traffic less. So I'm thinking about mobility, and we think of mobility as one of the built environment benefits. So that would be my quick flower. And take a look at yours if you drew one and see how they compare. And it's completely fine if they don't match. In fact, that's the goal. One way to use flower is to compare your flowers and ask questions like, Beth, why is your health pedal so big? I'm not sure that's supported. And at the end of the day, maybe I'd shrink that pedal if you made a good case, or maybe you'd see a benefit you hadn't even thought of. Feel free to put in the chat anything you notice about differences between your flower and mine. Maybe I think what we'll do is keep going, but at the end we can, if there's any interesting fodder in the differences there, we can talk about that. There's a few other things that we wanted to share from the article and look at how you might represent or capture those in flower. So this program has a big commitment to economic equity. They're proud that 44% of the rebates go to low-income residents of the city. But they also noticed when they did a follow-up survey of who receive the rebates, that the representation of people of color amongst that pool of rebate getters is a lot lower than the representation just in the population at large. So this is an important thing about equity, is that there are different types of equity, and different policies have different implications for the different types. So we would say, and I think they would agree in Denver, they're having pretty good success when it comes to economic equity. When it comes to racial equity, they have further to go relative to their goals. And in fact, the article, if you read it, talks about some great strategies they have to increase outreach and partner with community-based organizations so that the distribution of those vouchers is more racially equitable. So that, I think that's interesting to think about. And I want to give you an example of how you might use flour to discuss that with a group. And what I'm going to do is actually make 2 flours. I'm going to quickly reproduce the first flour that I made, and it won't be perfect, but we'll get pretty close. So I said a little bit of jobs. I said a lot of health. Important, pretty big connection, and a big pedal for climate protection. So the 2 flours are the same so far. They're showing the same set of benefits, but we're going to call flour 1 economic equity for the bike voucher program, and we're going to call flour 2 racial equity. And so we're going to work on flour 1 first. You always know what flour you're working on because it turns bright blue. I'm going to go to the equity tab, and I'm going to start with jobs. And when it comes to economic equity, because economically marginalized people are getting a lot of these vouchers, it's going to improve the jobs and livelihood equity. That mobility benefit is going to fall to people who are economically marginalized. That health benefit of safe physical activity, the health benefit of safe physical activity, and that sense of connection probably is also falling to that target group of economically marginalized people. I'm going to leave the climate benefit as it is, because climate is going to benefit everyone. Those reduced emissions are going to help everybody. That's not really targeted necessarily at a particular group. So that would be my quick representation of their success when it comes to economic equity. Now I'm going to look at flour 2. But what we heard about racial equity is that actually this benefit when it comes to jobs is flowing more to white people right now in Denver than people of color. That's a benefit going to an already centered group. So we're gonna say that's a little counter to the goal of increased equity. And I'm gonna probably follow along. Same for that access to mobility. I'm gonna make that a little bit down. Same for the health benefit. And same for the connection benefit. Now you can imagine this could be a whole conversation, exactly how far I should pull that slider down and why. And that's an important conversation to have. If the city of Denver were using this tool, which would be awesome, they might decide to make a flour every year and use this excellent data they're collecting to show a series of snapshots of how racial equity is improving because they've hopefully implemented these additional policies. So that gives you a sense, anchored in this real life example of how we're trying to give people a lot of resolution. I think a lot more resolution than many tools have, to be able to talk about different types of equity, right? We're talking about economic versus racial. If we wanted to make a 3rd flour, if they're tracking are women versus men taking up these rebates, we could have a gender equity flour. And also looking at equity being potentially different between different petals. One last thing really caught my attention in this article, which I'll just read you the quote. Someone involved in the project said, "There are lots of other things the city is working on, like building bus rapid transit and other infrastructure, but those take a long time." And he's comparing that to bikes. His point was, we can get bikes on the street this year and they can be used a lot. if we want to see reductions as soon as possible, we need to look at programs that can contribute to that right away. So let's add, the quickest way I'm going to do this is I'm going to add one more flower. I'm going to hide this one. This is our racial equity bike lanes, just so you're not distracted. So here's the bike rebates. And over here, we're going to do these bigger infrastructure projects really quickly. They're going to improve climate, right? Bus rapid transit is an important transportation lever when it comes to climate change. They are going to give people access to more mobility. There's going to be some jobs both in building that infrastructure and then operating it. Maybe not as much health and connection benefit. So that would be my very quick bus rapid transit versus e-bikes. And they're good things and they're complementary, and Denver's doing both. But let's look at the timing implications. That's why I want to look at these two examples. Let's start, we'll go back to our familiar voucher program, and I'm going to use the animation feature. Because what they're saying is that these benefits, they're seeing them happen really quickly. They're starting maybe in the first year of the project, and maybe it's a couple years to ramp up to see the full amount. So I'm saying jobs, that monetary savings, that's going to come pretty quickly. The mobility benefit, that's going to come, they're seeing within just a few years in the city. So I'm going to do this benefit by benefit. In this case, I think they all kind of happen at the same time. So I'm doing it quickly. What I'm entering is the year I think the benefit will start, the first year. How long until it's reached its full amount? I'm saying the third year. And I think I still have to do the health benefit. Okay, and did we do, sometimes it's good to just check and make sure you've hit everything you wanted to it. That's good because I missed climate. Okay, so this is our e-bike vouchers. Now I'm going to activate our bigger construction project that needs first to build some political will, and then to get some planning permission, and then to bid for the contracting firms. And maybe it's 7 years before all that happens. And maybe it's a 3-year project to complete it. So you're not going to start really seeing those emissions gains until then. Maybe some of the jobs benefits, they're going to be a little earlier because there's going to be those buildings. So let's say 4 years in, we're seeing some jobs, and by 12 years or so, they've really reached their maximum. And then the mobility benefit, well, it would seem to me that would require the project to be finished before you're really starting to have people have another way to get around the city. Okay, so we've built 2 flowers, and now when I push animate, and we can do it a couple times, you'll get a sense of 2 flowers animating at the same time. And if I've entered everything right, we're going to expect to see quick changes here, slower changes over here. So let's give it a try. Right, there's the e-bikes are already cruising along and really helping out Denver while this stuff is still coming online. And that's great. You want your strategy to be scattered like this, but you want to be clear about it. And that's the point of this animation function. So I'll just run it one more time. And if you ever want to look back and say, okay, at the end of the governor's first term of office, around here somewhere, how do things look? Or what about when my kid graduates from high school? You can move the slider back and forth and look at any point in the simulation. Okay, so that I think is as much as we can mine from that really cool article about Denver. I'm going to do a time check, which is that we have about 15 minutes left. So we have a couple important things. One is just some appreciations. And then Kelsey's going to talk a little bit about ways that she's been working with groups with Flower to give you some more inspiration for your own facilitation. So appreciation is really important to remember, to thank our funders, especially Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, the Why Wait Fund, and the Kresge Foundation. And also Flower, the little PP here is how we're experimenting calling the old version of Flower, which is the pencil and paper version. Many of you are on this call. Our inspiration to make Flower better and more powerful actually comes largely from what you were able to do with that very simple first version. Also, I want to reach out and appreciate our research team. I don't know if Susie Moser is on the call or not, but she did a really powerful set of interviews with Flower users and inspired us with noticing in how many different uses and places and scales the original Flower was being used. That really gave us confidence that this new tool was needed and would be useful. And then Susie, together with Tina Anderson-Smith, did lots of research of interviews with multi-solvers telling us about your biggest obstacles. And from what they consolidated, really influenced the design of the new version of Flower. The fact that now we can show burdens as well as benefits, this animation, the needs assessment, the ability to look at a few flowers at once, the ability to sense and use Flower as a way to learn and evaluate and monitor your impact. All of those features were inspired by those interviews. Some of you who were interviewed are on this call, and thank you for your time in doing that. It really did influence the design choices we made. And then, of course, there's the development and design team, including Kelsey, who you'll hear from in a minute, and Stephanie McCauley, who's on the call. If you use the user guide for Flower, and here's where you find it, click on this link down here. Stephanie made the user guide as clear and powerful as it is. Chris Soderquist, I think I saw his name on the attendees list here, is the systems thinker and programmer who built Flower. And he did that using software created by IC Systems. And Kelsey can put the links to both of those in the chat. If you're looking for a modeler systems thinker and you like how Flower looks, write down Chris's website. We're going to have to, I think, skip this part. We had ambitions to have you suggest some examples from your own work and try to diagram them with Flower. Instead, we'll give you the website in a minute and you can try it out yourself. And we'll tell you about some training opportunities. Maybe we can do more of your examples when we have more time then. So I'm going to pass through this and just set up with a couple words and pass the mic to Kelsey, who over the last 6 months, as we've been developing Flower, has been beta testing it with different groups. And I thought it would be really interesting to you to hear the to me, very different ways that Kelsey has adapted Flower. So Kelsey, over to you, and I'll put this slide up for you.
Yeah, thank you, Beth. And I think that this will, hopefully my sort of synopsis of different ways that I've used Flower will help to answer some of the questions and comments that we've got in the chat. So at the first iteration of this, I actually was a speaker along with Stephanie on our team at Climate Generation's 2024 Summer Institute. Their audience was primarily filled with educators, community advocates, and different people in leadership organizations. And those educators came from across, so K through full-blown professional PhD level educators. And the use of Flower sort of showcased, in this instance, the intergenerational accessibility that the tool has to really inspire new bounds for how projects can be developed equitably across silos. One attendee said that the process of Flower building gave each of us a chance to shine in describing how the project could meet the community building and climate mitigation goals and priorities of the mayor of Greenfield, which, by the way, we used that in a role-playing exercise. We had a hypothetical city of Greenfield, where they were able to come together and think outside of the box of what improvements in that city could look like. And the next iteration of me being able to use that tool, I recently went to Policy Link's Equity Summit. And I sort of look like Guillermo from Jimmy Kimmel's show, if you're familiar with him, but I had my iPad and I was just kind of running up to people like, hey, what's a problem that you're facing in your work? Or what's an opportunity that you see where a project has potential to go further and to have more impact? And really just one-on-one intimate settings, just used my iPad to go through building out flowers with them to help sort of facilitate that conversation with them. So that's an opportunity where it shows that facilitating flower does not have to be in a workshop life or in a workshop setting. It ultimately really could be a one-on-one situation where you're working with someone. And then most recently, and what you see some photos here, I worked with the Partnership for Southern Equity, which is an awesome organization based here in Atlanta, Georgia, where I am. And they have a Just Communities program where they recently granted seed funding to 4 different communities across Atlanta to implement a project that would help address some sort of equity and climate or sustainability goal within that community. Um, and each of those groups actually used flower in a different way, primarily because they're all at different stages in the development of their projects. So, one group wanted to compare 3 different potential project ideas that they had for their community to determine which project would have the best impact that also align the most with community goals. And so they use flower to create 3 different flowers, again, based on that assess needs screen to determine which project would have the best outcome for them from an equity standpoint as well. Another group actually used flower to add a really critical lens to some opportunities that still existed within their strategy and maybe fill some of those holes, and wanted to do more to support more climate action and equity goals within a workforce development training program and building out a green jobs training hub within their community. And that's the community of Peoplestown, who is hoping to be known as the Green Jobs Training Hub within the city of Atlanta. So they were able to use flower um, to think through that strategy more strategically and to get a better understanding of um, one, what partners need to be at the table, and two, how they could really bring this to reality without forgetting different aspects that they might not have thought about when they initially came up with this idea. Um, and then finally, the last group wanted to really make sure that they could think about which partners needed to be at the table. And that was in tandem with an asset map that some interns from Emory University pulled together to think about the different organizations, whether it was a church, a nonprofit, a for profit, or a community led organization that could potentially play a role into their project development as well. So, as you can see, flower really just supports the thinking around facilitating these conversations, and it helps identify voices that need to be at the table, the decision making table that oftentimes get excluded from that. So, flower is very intentionally designed to adapt to your situation and to be scalable to the type of project that you're hosting. So, with that, I will pass it back to Beth.
Yeah, thanks, Kelsey. And I imagine as time goes on, we'll be sharing examples on our blog of some of these engagements. So that's a good place to look for updates. So there's a couple important last things I want to show you, and then we're happy to stay a few minutes longer for any questions that people might have. The 2 most important buttons on Flower, this is said a little tongue in cheek, but it's really important. This is the welcome screen or the home screen, and you'll find a few links here. The user guide I mentioned here and here will take you to a downloadable PDF that gives you the documentation for the tool. But there's 2 other really important things. This button, registering your events, takes you to a really simple form that will help us know what you're doing and learn from your successes and any places where you run into trouble. But also helps us share with our funders and supporters the impact that people are having with flower. So in order to keep developing flower, to make it better, to answer even some of the questions I'm seeing in the chat with features that we could imagine, it's really important that we know who's using flower, how much, how many people are coming, and it should just take you a few minutes. So please remember to do that if you use flower. And the second button is for donation. So we've made the intentional decision that flower is going to be freely available. In fact, it's an important part of our value set at Multisolving Institute that that's true. We see this as a way to embody our principle of equity, that we have the great privilege of being funded to do this work, but one way we can share that privilege is by making the products of it available to everyone. That said, we know that, or believe that some of you are going to be able to use flower probably for paid engagement. Maybe you're a consultant or you're helping with a city or a corporation. If you would embody that spirit of paying it forward so that other people can have the benefit of flower, we've made that as easy as possible to think about 1% for flower from your paycheck for consulting using flower, something like that. So we really hope this works and that we are able to keep flower freely available. Okay, here's how you find flower. Kelsey will put it in the chat, but it's really easy. Just go to multisolving.org and look in the menu, and at the top line of the menu it says flower, or this is the URL that will get you there directly. And the last thing we want to be sure to say is that there's a lot coming in the next few months from Multisolving Institute. We're going to be starting flower trainings so we can have more conversation like we just barely started in the chat here, and get more into the details of how you might facilitate with flower. So to know how to sign up for those, please, if you don't already get our newsletter, sign up for that. Also, my book on multisolving is coming out November 26th. And after that, we're going to be having quite the series of virtual events. We're calling it a virtual book tour, and the hosts all over the world are partnering with us to share the multisolving book. So we'll be making those available. Also, you may want to host one, and please reach out to us at info@multisolving.org if that's something that you'd like to learn more about. But the most important thing is our newsletter, just so you know what's coming forward. And beyond that, thanks for being with us today and celebrating flower and celebrating all the people who helped us get here. Thanks for your great questions. I skimmed the chat a little bit. It's only 2 minutes before the hour, so I know that many of you need to leave. I can stay for a few minutes, and Kelsey perhaps also. So we'll take what questions we can, but if you have to leave, thank you so much for being with us, and we'll be in touch. All right, I'm opening up the chat, but Kelsey, you might have a better idea than I of a few things to take a look at.
Yeah, so it looks like the first question that we got in the chat, and Clemens, feel free to hop off of mute if you want to expand on it. But the question was, equity doesn't impact the number score, right? Why not? And would it not make sense to set needs for equity as well?
No, yeah, thanks for asking that. So your good observation. You're right that for now the needs match score is just based on the benefits, but of course equity is part of people's goals, and we know how to do the math to do that, and our budget under our current round of funding just wouldn't stretch that far. So that's on the list that we're pitching to funders for further development of flower. And for us to be able to tell them that's a feature users are requesting is would be really helpful. So I'll take that and add into the chat if you think that's a feature you'd like to see, to have either one score that have included both the size of the benefits and equity, or an equity score along with a benefit score.
Sorry, guys, my dog is trying to jump into our call right now, so apologies for that. The next question that we got, Beth, is a question from Patty that says, I assume the ratings and scales are based on the subjective assessments of the user. How do you suggest using the tool or complementing it with other tools to surface our inevitable blind spots?
Yeah, so that's, thank you, Patty. And that's something on the design team we've talked about a lot. And this would go just like that equity score, actually, in our wish list for future funding. So you've probably picked up from me in how I was talking about the tool, how important we think this qualitative, what do we actually know, we who are gathered here together. We think that's really powerful. And like Patty's saying, sometimes it's good to be grounded in data or assessment or the work of people who've come before us. The way we're thinking about this is actually would use a feature of Flower I didn't show you. So let's just go there quickly and I can point it out. These little buttons here are called loading saved inputs or saving current parameters. So Flower is able to save the flowers that you've created, and you could email those. They're just little Excel files, and someone else could upload them. So with that feature, we could employ a research team to create flowers based on real case studies in the world that have had, say, cost-benefit analysis done on them. And then if you're trying to think about making a flower for bike paths in Pasadena, you could go to a library Multisolving Institute would maintain of bike paths in New York City and Mexico City, and see what those flowers look like and compare them against your own and improve your thinking and anchor your thinking. That's a big project quantitatively. It's not, there's a lot of apples and oranges problems. It would take a really good research team, but we think it's doable and we think it's important, and we're working on raising the funding to be able to do that.
Beth, can you show those controls? We can't see your screen right now, so can you just?
Oh,
show
yeah.
those?
Good point, Stephanie. Thank you. Okay, so this says load saved inputs. Are you guys seeing that now? And that says save current parameters. So that's how you would do that. All right. Thanks, everyone. We really appreciate your attention, and let us know how it goes as you try Flower out.